Welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, helping you ace your exams at school and university through the psychology of high performance and the science of studying smarter, not harder. It's my pleasure to introduce your host, the Cambridge-trained memory psychologist and exam success coach, William Wadsworth.
Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Experts podcast. As the academic cycle kicks into gear for many of my listeners around the world, we're going to focus over the next few episodes on a little mini-series on the academic skills of note-making, research and writing. Core skills that are huge parts of success for listeners at all stages of their learning journey, particularly once you hit undergraduate level and beyond. But things like note-making and how to write well are pretty universal in terms of when they apply in your learning journey. We're going to tackle note-making first. And in fact, I think when it comes to note-making, the skill of recording and capturing content or ideas and using that as we're going to focus on next week in particular to kind of augment our thinking, that's a skill we all need in various forms, at least to some extent, even if we're not even studying for anything. I fill a notebook probably once every sort of 3 to 6 months. And for me, note-making is a huge part of my world and my day-to-day life. So our first pair of episodes this week and next week will cover, firstly this week, a little on the science of note-making, and then next week we'll turn to look at the art of note-making. So it should be a nice little pair for you. We're going to start today with a bit on the science and what we know about research that's been done on how to get the most from note-making. We'll be talking about questions like, what do good notes look like? Should we be making notes on a laptop or handwriting them? And how we should think about structuring our notes for different purposes. To help us untangle the evidence from the research, we're welcoming back a friend of the podcast and author of Study Like a Champ, Professor John Dunlosky. Now, John shot to fame and is perhaps best known for his work on evaluating different learning techniques, and his conversation with us on this back in episode 154 earlier this year was a real highlight for me this year. But he's also written at length about the science of note-making, including in his book, Study Like a Champ. And the conversation that follows shares some of the big takeaways he has for us on the science of note-making. So let's dive in. I wonder if we could touch on one aspect of the learning journey that's very important, particularly for students at college, university level, and that's note-making. So, when you're sitting there in class, the kind of mechanics of what you do with that time and how you kind of record what's going on in that lecture or in that class, so you can make that experience as useful as possible. So, yeah, I know you've done a bit of research on note-making too. Why is note-making important?
Oh, that's very good, because note-taking is a big issue for a variety of reasons. And let me just briefly mention how I got into the note-taking game, which is kind of through the back door. There was some really interesting outcomes suggesting that taking notes on a laptop was inferior than taking notes with longhand, which for a variety of reasons could make sense cognitively, right? And just at that time, I started working with another group who are doing electronic note-taking by hand, and they wanted to do some research in this area. So I got interested in it. So this is kind of a secondary kind of research interest for me. And what I noticed as I was reading that literature had less to do with taking notes by laptop than by hand, and more about just taking notes versus not taking notes. And one thing that's just glaringly obvious for anyone who goes and reads that literature is that if you compare students' learning after they just take notes versus for when they just listen and don't take notes, there's almost no difference between the two groups. So taking notes in its own right doesn't really lead to major improvements in retention or any improvements in retention, memory, or what have you. Okay. So the act of taking notes itself is just not that important. Okay. Whether you take with laptop or longhand doesn't matter. However, having good notes as an artifact to go back to study is absolutely essential. So having good notes is what's critical. How you get those good notes probably doesn't matter, right? So if you're someone who just likes to listen, but then borrows notes from a friend, that's great. but you need to make sure those notes you're getting from a friend are complete and accurate. So when I talk to students about why they're struggling in class, of course, I look to the study strategies they're using, and then I look at their notes. And often the students who aren't performing as well have lots of holes in their notes. Like they just stop recording stuff, like the recorder stops and they don't have that content. And note, that's fine. They're listening, right? And they're probably understanding what they're hearing. But then when they go back to restudy to get ready for the exam, the content they need is not there. So for any student listening, I'd say I wouldn't worry about how you get those notes down. The key for good notes is making sure you have all the content that you need to learn. So when students ask me the crazy question, is this going to be on the exam? I love that question because that's a student who's thinking in their seat and thinking like, am I responsible? And I want them to get that in their notes. In fact, as an instructor anymore, when it's something that's really important, I tell people, pick up your pens now. It's time to take notes, right? So that was kind of a long-winded statement to say, yeah, notes are absolutely critical, but not how you take them. It's just making sure you have complete notes. Now, if you take notes in a way that allow you then to easily implement a good study strategy, like retrieval practice or successive relearning, then you're kind of one step ahead. So many of the students and people out there might have heard of Cornell notes and so forth. All Cornell's notes are meant to do is to help you take notes in a way that then you can use successive relearning for. That's it. So you don't have to use Cornell notes. You just need to leave spaces in your notes so you can practice retrieval. Anyway, I'm sorry, that was kind of long-winded to say notes are critical, but the debate about what's the best way to take notes, there is no best way because taking notes really doesn't do that much for you. It's having the notes, that's essential.
It's really interesting. I think you said that was one of your own study strategies that was serving you well in your own student days, having notes that you could test yourself on. So in some way capturing some questions and then some answers so you could cover up those answers, test yourself on the questions.
Absolutely. And all they told me in this very short, 30-minute class on getting ready for exams, use every other side of your notebook. So every other page. So one page is blank, right? One page is notes, and use the blank side to try to retrieve the content from the other side. How simple is that? I mean, in retrospect, am I upset that I wasted paper? Kind of, right? I don't want to waste paper. But it wasn't a waste because I was using it as a study technique, a very inexpensive study technique, right? Very low-tech, paper-based.
I know some people that take notes on their laptop and, you can, if you're doing it in Word or something, you can quite easily make a table with 2 columns for questions, answers. One question that, just a tiny little detail, how do I test myself on that? Well, it's a bit clunky to hold paper up to the screen. So a little trick that I started suggesting was you can turn the text white for the answer column and then gradually turn it black as you want to reveal the answers. So it just saves you faffing around with trying to hold something up to a laptop screen. Could be a bit cumbersome.
That's beautiful. I mean, right? Those are just kind of a new way to develop flashcards to test yourself on that content. I think that's a great idea. Love it.
One other question on note making, certainly from my own experience, and I sort of hear a fair bit, and maybe it's a kind of UK-US difference, I'm not sure, but, certainly for, I think all my lectures I ever had, we got quite a decent set of typed up notes handed out to us, given to us by the lecturer. So they are typically a big printed pile of paper stacked up at the back of the room, and you'd all come in and collect it at the start of class. And then, we'd all sort of, I guess, be annotating it as they went. And, probably in a lot of cases, the things we were scribbling in the margin were exactly the same things that were in the typed body of the notes. Do you have any thoughts for what a student should be actually doing with it? Should they just sit and listen if they have that set of printed good notes? Or, would you recommend annotating it, or should they still make their own? What would your suggestion be in that circumstance?
This is difficult to make suggestions here, right? Because it's going to depend on the dynamics of the class. So sometimes it's the examples that the instructor provides. It's the additional content beyond the slides that are really critical for comprehension that I would be jotting down furiously on the slides that I was given so as to help me reconstruct the content. I mean, I always, as an instructor, like to see pens moving because I try to set up my content in a way that it's interactive, but also essential. I don't like to provide content that I don't think is important for students just because of the efficiency thing. So, I don't think I have any definitive suggestions except for instructors that I know there was some preliminary research, and apologies if this has all been published and it's plenty of this is out. This is just my own naivete. I've not looked into this in a while. But if you give, say, students lecture notes with blanks in them for them to fill out, the idea is that, okay, well, the students need to be more engaged because they have to listen until they get to the part that they need to fill in. But at least some prior studies, and again, apologies, I don't have this in the tip of my head, kind of suggest that students just kind of wait until they hear, oh, this is the part I need to fill out, and then they space out. So it's like they're kind of coming to class just to fill this out, and it's less engaging than one might think. That said, there are other ways to engage students in lectures other than have them take notes that we could talk about in another podcast about, think, pair, share, and otherwise. Because the idea is to have students leave the classroom, right, with artifacts, the notes that they can study outside of class, but inside the class, give them those experiences that help them take that content and truly understand it, right? So a lot of the techniques that we discuss in Study Like a Champ are really, it's a book for students and how they should study the content outside of class. So they know it really well, which allows the instructor then to use that valuable class time to really push the envelope on instruction that's relevant to comprehension, engagement with the content, really understanding it well. So I think really the ultimate situation is where students are taking good notes, the instructors are getting the students engaged in the content. It's almost like they have an understanding that the students are going to work hard outside of class to learn the content, and the instructors are going to work really hard inside the classroom to help the students understand it. So we've all got to be on the same team to make this work out well.
I wonder if we could just wrap up with one final thought to kind of tie all this together a little bit. So, like, what's the best thing to do, like, before class, during class, after class? Maybe just kind of give us a flavor of that kind of process that you kind of suggest students follow for kind of before, during, after.
Well, certainly before class, I don't have that many suggestions. I mean, there are things you could do before class. I mean, things that I'd like to see students do is to review their notes from the last class. So if they have questions, they're coming in, right? Or review their notes so that they're ready for I always start each class with a set of simple multiple choice quizzes that are low stakes, no stakes to get them, warm them up and so forth. During class, of course, pay attention, take good notes, or find a friend who takes good notes. But certainly, and this is important, as soon as possible after class, check to make sure you have full notes. Read over your notes to see if you have questions. I mean, that's a great time where you just have enough memory for the lecture so you can realize, oh, I know, the teacher said something that was really important. I didn't get it down. That'll give you a chance to fill in those notes either from a friend or from instructor. I mean, students need to realize that instructors are getting paid to instruct them, and that it's just not the class time that we're there for them, but it's outside of class time as well. So, wow, that's such a great question, William. I wish I had a better answer for you. I mean, hopefully what students are doing before class is they're getting really psyched to have a very engaging, hour lecture from a great instructor. But
John, thank you so much. You've been incredibly generous this afternoon, or you've been incredibly generous, and I'm so grateful for you sharing just a generous taste of your immense wisdom and expertise on this topic. Tell us, where do we go to find out more? So if we want to go and read the book or learn more about sort of your work, where would you point people to?
Well, first, thanks for having me on board today. This has just been a blast. Quite frankly, I think really this, for students out there, either students in college, high school students, folks who are lifelong learners, I hate to say it, but I'd pick up the book that I co-authored with Regan Gurung called Study Like a Champ. It's really inexpensive. It gets right to the point. We talk right to students. Each chapter is about to do one thing. We don't hit you with 100 different strategies. We just talk about a couple things that really work well. So I'd pick that up, peruse it, and, go from there.
Great book. And we'll drop the link to that in the show notes, the episode description for this, so it's nice and easy for people to find.
Thanks.
John, thank you so much once again for coming on. This has been so much fun, and wishing you all the best.
Glad I was here.
Well, thanks again to Professor John Dunlosky. And if you haven't already picked up a copy, John's book, Study Like a Champ, is one of my top pick new books that have come out in the last couple of years, and highly recommended as a great introduction to the science of effective studying, from learning and memory to, of course, taking great notes. I'll put a link to the book in the episode description. And remember, whenever you treat yourself to a book via a link in one of our episode descriptions, the Exam Study Expert podcast earns a small commission at no extra cost to you. So buying a book via the link is always a nice little way to support the show if you're enjoying what we do for you. So do join me again next week when we'll be switching our attention to the art of note-making with author George Arango, author of Duly Noted, Extend Your Mind Through Connected Notes. As George notes in his book, you think by writing things down. The idea that thinking isn't just happening in your brain, but it's also captured on paper. And by doing that, you're thinking with and on the paper and kind of almost like extending your brain power by using paper to supplement your own internal brain capacity. I think it's a really intelligent way to think about note-making. And George's perspective on notes generally is really fascinating. For him, and these kind of ideas that I'm teasing, note-making is less of an isolated tool to jot down a few points for later. Sure, it can do that for you, but he sees it very much as a kind of almost an integrated system that touches all domains of your life, not just academics and studying, and brings it all together in your notes system. So really interesting conversation. I think lots of food for thought in next week's episode. So I hope to have your company next week for that. In the meantime, I want to wish you every success, as always, in your studies.
Well, that was good, wasn't it? I found myself taking notes. If you need a reminder of anything from today, head to the website for a write-up of this episode, as well as lots more top-notch advice and resources. That's examstudyexpert.com. See you next time.